Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. We are here today with Emily Opilo and Fern Shen. Emily's with the Baltimore Sun and Fern is with the Baltimore Brew. And we are talking about a recent decision handed down by what I lovingly like to think of as the PIACB, but really it's the Public Information Act Compliance Board. And that mouthful of an organization is able to rule on disputes between requesters and custodians in the state of Maryland on a whole range of issues. This board has been around for about 5 years now, and recently in July of 2022 gained some expanded powers from the legislature. And this case or this issue is one of the newest decisions under that expanded jurisdiction. So welcome to the program, Fern and Emily.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So let's break it down. There's so much that's going on. This complaint that you are working with, or the public records that you were trying to get, was related to Marilyn Mosby and some donation records. And there's so much going on with Marilyn Mosby. So can you guys sort of take a step back for us and explain what you were looking for and what happened? And you both were working independently, but just on the same issue, which is why it came up twice.
Right. Well, everybody was interested in getting that, other media as well as, as the Sun and the Brew. The Mosbys, Marilyn Mosby, then the state's attorney, and Nick Mosby, her husband, the city council president. There was a defense fund set up, an online defense fund to raise money for their legal challenges they had at the time. And this was after, correct me if I'm wrong on that, Emily, the public became aware of a federal investigation into their finances. And so they created this online donor box. It was, $5 if you want to check here, $10 if you want to check here, that kind of thing. Fundraising entity. And naturally, the media wanted to know, who was contributing to that. And that was the request that we made to get the information from the ethics board. And then why don't you take the next chapter, Emily, where it came from the ethics board, released the names, but something, or the list, but something key was missing.
Right. Well, and like Fern, this fight's been going on for a very long time. Like, this fund was created in 2021. This was back before either Marilyn Mosby, before she had been criminally charged. This was back when, as far as we knew, the investigation was looking at both of the Mosbys at that point. And, she has since been criminally charged. She faces charged with perjury and making false statements related to some withdrawals from her city retirement account and the purchase of 2 Florida homes. So obviously, there was a lot of interest in looking at who the donors were to this fund. At the time when it was created, an attorney for Marilyn Mosby said that it would be managed by an uninterested legal trustee. And that's still a legally dangerous area in Maryland. The state and the city's ethics law prohibits elected officials from raising money both directly and indirectly, which would mean someone else was raising money on the couple's behalf. And that's basically what we saw happening here with the fund. The city's ethics law and the state ethics law also consider donations to the fund to be gifts, and law bans gifts from all controlled donors, and that's any people that have business, with that official's agency. So in Nick Mosby's case, it would be the city. In Marilyn Mosby's case, it would have been the state's attorney's office. but also anybody who's regulated by that agency or people who have private interests that can be impacted by that official's performance or duties. So the way that the fund was organized, there was really no way to know if controlled donors were giving, if they were in fact in violation of the law, if they, that was an issue. And so, yeah, like Fern said, there was a lot of interest in making sure that we could figure out who was going to be giving to that fund. Because, I mean, both Marilyn and Nick Mosby at that point were both in public office. They hold power, and people are going to be looking to curry favor with those people. And normally we would see those donations via campaign donations, right, which are fully disclosed in the state of Maryland and virtually everywhere, because then you can see, for transparency's sake, if someone is taking a favorable action for someone that also donated to them. But with a system like the Legal Defense Fund, we had no way to see that. So, yeah, if you want to, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it sounds like a direct obfuscation, really. I mean, like, it sounds like there was, maybe not intent, but certainly waters were muddied in terms of that transparency, which is super customary. You are able in all those campaign finance reports to see the donors and the amounts. So,
and everybody expects that when you donate to a campaign, people know that that's going to be public. And in the case of this Legal Defense Fund, there's no indication, nobody has said that the donors presumed that their names would be kept private. So, this really comes from the city and the ethics board and the law department.
Right.
So the decision finally came out.
Right. So, and what reasoning? So for those who may not be really hyper aware of the Public Information Act, when a custodian denies a request, they have to cite some sort of reason. They just can't say, even though it feels like sometimes they do, you're not supposed to say, oh, we're just not going to give that to you. So what was the reasoning behind them not providing that information? Do you recall?
Well, they didn't give it wasn't a full denial. They did release the list. They just redacted everything that was useful on the list, and that was the names of the donors and where they lived. And they argued that was financial information, which in the state of Maryland,
they cited for the PIA nerds among us. They cited, I had to pull this up to remind myself, Section 4-328. That's there are some exceptions to when public bodies have to, provide information under the act. And the one they cited was this one about disclosure of information about the finances of an individual, including assets, income, liabilities, net worth, bank balance, financial history, or activities or credit worthiness. So, ultimately, when this came before the board, they didn't think it comes under this exception. But the exception, one would think this is really, your bank balance or your, do you have a bad credit rating, that those things are extraneous and shouldn't be, released as part of a PIA request. But this is something, something more akin to, like Emily's saying, and like you're saying, Rebecca, really, it's hardly different than a campaign contribution.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what as well. Cited. Yeah. Well, it stuns me because you had in this case, it wasn't just like this. We found out this donor list existed. I mean, we had the ethics board rule against, this is the city ethics board, rule against Nick Mosby and say he was in violation of the city's ethics law with the creation of this account and by fundraising for this account. And that order that they issued him was to stop fundraising, but it was also to produce the list of donors.
Right.
So they obviously saw value in disclosing the list of donors at some point, that they should be out there so we could tell who the controlled donors were, so we could see the fundraising activities. And then you also had a judge, a circuit court judge, uphold that ruling whenever Nick Mosby challenged that in court, also saying, yes, this was a violation of the law, enforcing the order of the ethics board to release the list. And then only after that, after this case was closed, after Nick Mosby complied, the Board of Ethics still declined to release the list to the public. And it's stunning to me because the Board of Ethics made initially a ruling for transparency and now is obfuscating the list themselves.
Well, what do you think has changed? I mean, as Emily said, the Board of Ethics made, it sounds like, some moves to at least indicate that they thought transparency was important. But now, they've sort of gone against that in that denial and subsequent appeal of this decision, which we'll get into for a minute. But Fern, do you
I
have a
think it,
sense of like why they've changed?
and I think it raises a question about how independent this entity really is.
Mm.
So we've got this ethics board. Do they make these judgments themselves, or do they answer to the law office? And when it's the law office, that's essentially it's run by a mayoral appointee, the city solicitor. So are they independent of the mayoral administration or not? Their answer to us was that they take their guidance, quote unquote, from the law office. So do we, it's just another thing that has been an issue that's been raised as a part of this whole controversy. This whole issue is, do we have an independent board of ethics in the city?
Yeah, and Emily, I'm seeing you nod your head vigorously. Do you what do you think about that?
Well, in the initial dealings with the Board of Ethics, we were dealing just with the Board of Ethics.
Yeah.
But then later on, we're now getting statements directly from the solicitor's office on this. Like, when it came time to appeal, we're now hearing from the solicitor, who does represent all of the city's elected officials. And then, it sometimes feels like the mayor's office is particularly in control of that. But Nick Mosby is the second most powerful person in Baltimore. And the solicitor's office does represent him. And they're also the ones who've sort of taken the reins of this. They're the ones filing the challenges and the appeals. And from just things that we hear internally, there is disagreement within the city over this. I'm sure Fern's heard the same that I have, that some people just simply wanted to cough up the list right away within the ethics realm, and that didn't happen. And then now that we have a favorable opinion from the compliance board, some people have thought it should simply be handed over because they lost, and instead they are challenging this in court.
Right. I mean, they've got political cover, they got legal cover. If their concern was, if somebody could say we ignored, that section exception 4-328, and we, made we're personally, we're liable for having, misread the act. They got guidance from the compliance board that no, I mean, a state body told them, no, you're not, you didn't need that provision didn't need to kick in. This should be released. They were given kind of legal permission. So yeah, as Emily says, it's just kind of mind-boggling that the city's going to challenge this. Well, I guess in your chronology, Rebecca, we've jumped over the fact that
they actually did rule.
We did get a ruling in our favor.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
I mean, there's an upside to this conversation, which is the reformed compliance board, or with the reforms and changes in the law. Did get involved here and did, from the point of view of us journalists, make a good decision.
Yeah, well, and so this is one of the first decisions that have come about under that re-engineered board with more jurisdiction. So to kind of just provide a little bit of history, the Public Information Act Compliance Board, when it was first formed, only had jurisdiction on fee disputes of $350 or fewer or less. So that was a really focused sandbox in which to make change. And then in 2021, I believe reforms were passed. I think it was 2021. They didn't go in effect until July of 2022. But the jurisdiction of the board was enlarged so that anything the ombudsman could advise on, it was now something that the board could rule upon and kind of create precedent. So the only thing that they cannot rule on right now is fee waivers, whether or not a public interest fee waiver or indigency fee waiver was valid. So with that kind of framework, tell us about the process. I don't think I've ever really talked to someone on the nitty gritty. Like, do they bring you in for questioning? Is it that official, or how does that process work?
No, well, first, and I guess you went through this too. The process is you have to go to the ombudsman. You have to see if this dispute can be resolved and, through mediation. So make your case with people, or in my case, email, with our legal arguments, aided by our pro bono attorney helper, David Plymeyer, who's been a, real help to us as a small shop anyway. So it's a pretty straightforward, explain what happened, what did you request, what did they say, let's see the email from the body, denying you, what's your argument, and we send this in to them, and they go back to the city, and within I don't know how long it took, not too long, to say the city's not budging, so you actually have to file a formal complaint to the board. Did you go through? I guess you went through that step too, Emily, right?
I did too, and I don't know about you, but while the ombudsman's office has been lovely to deal with, I've never.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot of power, so
No,
in this case, the ombudsman said to us that they did see a potential avenue for these records to be given out, which wasn't necessarily something that we were all considering, but and they were going to take this avenue to the city and see, if they could reach an agreement. And the city, of course, just said no to that. And so our case was eventually marked. I think it was not resolved, is whatever the terminology was.
The terminology. But so then the next step is sort of a more formal appeal to the board. And so we sent that in with a longer, lengthier, fancier argument, but basically the same thing. And, came back with a good result, I guess, same with you, right, Emily?
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't seem to have any ambiguity in, like, the decision wasn't like, oh, well, on one hand, this person has this valid complaint, but over here we see this. It felt very unequivocal. Was that your thought as well?
Yeah, and I thought there was both a kind of a legal pushback against the city's arguments, and also the somewhat common sense argument that we were all making. It's like, it really is just very much like a campaign contribution. So, shouldn't it be public? Shouldn't we treat it as such? And, in legal language from a public body down in Annapolis, pretty much the same argument was made here.
Yeah.
Right.
So then what is this? And I know the status as of the time of recording is that the city has filed an appeal, and you all either jointly or singly or in whatever configuration have the opportunity to weigh in and sort of file in that appeal as well. But I wanted to talk more about the significance of this, because I feel like if something like this is allowed to stand, what happens? Does everyone pop up with a legal defense fund? What does it mean for transparency and campaign finance as well?
Yeah. Well, it's really serious, and the transparency question. I mean, here we are in a city that's had, several mayors brought down by corruption charges. Confidence in the process, and that it's a level playing field, and people, insiders can't get special advantage. I mean, that is really a bedrock issue for the city of Baltimore, and for any government. And for this, for something like this to stand, it would really, just undermine people's confidence in government.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which we're already struggling with. I'm sorry, Emily, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I mean, with these legal defense funds, I mean, the way Maryland law is set up, it's almost impossible to operate one legally when you are unable to directly or indirectly fundraise. And yet, absent an ethics board opinion, we would still have this one operating, I think. And it's so frustrating that we're all these years later now still in dispute who donated to this fund. I mean, Nick Mosby is still in office. He has announced a campaign for re-election, and Marilyn Mosby is no longer in office. But we deserve to know, as the public and as the media, who has donated to him, particularly in a campaign year. And we don't know. And this fight could go on for quite a while longer, And we're gambling that the 130 names on the list will be fruitful. Ultimately the fund didn't raise too much money. Perhaps political donors were less enthused with the Mosbys at that point. Some of them might have donated to the couple's campaigns instead. The fund just didn't operate for long enough but it did raise $14,000 from 130 people, and we still don't
That's
know
not
who
nothing.
those. Right? It's not nothing, right?
Right. It's not nothing. Some of them were from, at least two were from these so-called controlled donors who had business
Right.
before the city. And one of those controlled donors, donated $5,000. I mean, that is
Right.
not.
I mean, a lot of that fund came from one person, and we still don't know who that one person is.
Right. Oh, people are playing this parlor game on the internet. Like, oh, let's see, what was the zip code? Who could that
Right.
be? This is just not how it should work. We should just know it. And, a lot of these names will be sort of innocuous, probably people who donated publicly that we already can see on campaign contributions, small amounts. So, is what it is. But, some of these are going to be interesting, and we should know about it.
Well, and also I think with the Mosbys, just in general, there's been some interesting, like the dead grandfather had donated to the campaign fund. I mean, so there's the names on there really are still very, they can tell us a lot, I think.
And the timing of this is really too bad. I mean, it's going to be delayed, which it will be because of this appeal that the city has decided to make. So that'll probably push this past I'm guessing, past the election or past much of the campaign.
Right,
So,
you would think so.
It's a delaying tactic that, benefits, Nick Mosby.
Right. And incumbents in Baltimore really have the advantage anyway. And so it would be, to have this all sort of come out after the election, it's sort of, this is a material, timely piece. Are there other things that the Board of Ethics, earlier you had talked about sort of the lack of independence, that the perceived independence of the Board of Ethics. What could change that? I mean, if they're answering to the city solicitor's office, does the inspector general get involved in some way to maybe issue a report about the independence of the ethics board, or what do you see happening?
She runs it.
Okay, all right. Well, then she's not doing a thing. I'm sorry.
Well, you're not wrong, because she runs it, but she doesn't. So it's an awfully confusing situation. She oversees the board. There's a staff member. While she oversees it, there's a law department staff member that's assigned. There's a staff that the inspector general oversees, who technically are staff to the board. So it's all very intertwined, and just just simply because she would like to maybe release something doesn't even mean that seems to happen. So it's an awfully confusing dynamic of who's really in charge. And then you have an ethics board itself too, which are like nominated members that have their own opinions on things too. And so it's like, who
I don't know what it would take
who wins out.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't know what would it take a city council, bill to strengthen the ethics board, I guess would, I don't know how you'd phrase it, but.
You mean the council that's controlled by Nick Mosby?
Well, yeah.
It might have an upward path there. Yeah.
Might not be motivation there.
Yeah, I don't know how it happens, Emily. I guess we're just at the winds of politics. Baltimore's gonna Baltimore, as they say.
Yeah.
I don't know, but at least we have this compliance board decision. That's heartening in the scheme of things. So, good for Annapolis. And we'll see.
Yeah, and I do feel like in transparency, it's all just these baby steps. You sort of feel like before we started to record, I was telling Emily that, our big push, as we look for change to the PIA is to get, the fee waivers under the jurisdiction of the board, because there's so many times where the public interest fee waivers are just kind of, ignored in some ways. And then also, our exemptions are so broad, which if there's a culture of transparency, not a big deal. But if there's not, which we kind of are kind of easing into these days,
Yeah.
or already there,
Well,
it makes things just much, much more difficult. So sounds like this is something that will be ongoing. I hope for all of us that the powers that be will decide that it's important to inform the public and have a more transparent um, aspect, especially to money in politics, because that's what it where we really run astray. So thank you both for coming out today and talking with me about this, and we'll see what happens and how the appeal goes.
yep. Thank you
Thank
for having.
you.
I hope people pay attention, and the next step is a positive one. We'll come back to give you chapter 2, Rebecca.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.